In our previous video, we saw how to use a label and date picker tag helper to update our prototype app and add some more rich functionality to our input form. And we're going to continue with that demo app. And in our prototype, we have a list of first and last names. It's just some static text under team members here. And what I want is a drill down hierarchical list of employees that I can click on and drill into, and eventually we'll report that employee data over here on the right hand side. So I just want to focus on getting those employee names into a nice drill down tree, and let's jump over to our application and see how to implement that tree view tag helper. So here's where Scott left off. He replaced those date pickers with some nice Kendo date pickers. And we're going to do the same here under team members. We're going to replace this simple unordered list with a Kendo tree view tag helper. Now, before we get started with implementing the tag helper, let's take a look at the employees controller where our data is coming from. And we have a database that we're connecting to, and that database has a table with employees in it. Now, we have an action here called employees read, and it takes an integer, which is optional, and if we supply the integer, that's the employee's ID, and it will give us the child records of that employee. So if the employee has employees that report up to that employee, then that's what we'll get when we pass that employee. So we're querying for that data here. And once we query that data, we're going to create a projection that's going to give us the employee name, the full name, and whether or not that record has child records. So let's go back to our employee list view and let's start coding up our tree view. So we can say Kendo tree view. We want a tree view, not a tree list, tree view. And then we need to tell the tree view what we want to call this control. We'll give it a name, and we'll set this to employees list. So the name is going to be employees list. And then we need to tell the tree view what data we would like to display when it iterates over those records that it finds. So we need to set a data text field. Now we just looked at that projection that comes from our action, and it supplies a full name field. So we'll use the full name as our data text field. Now we need to tell the control where to get the data from. So we'll set up a hierarchical data source. Notice IntelliSense giving me help with these different tags that need to go inside of this tree view. And we need to set up a transport, and the transport will instruct it where to do the create, read, and delete operations. And we're going to focus on read here. We need to give it the URL of that action. So I'm going to say at url.action, and inside of that action, we want to tell this URL where to find our action name, and it's going to be employees read, and then the controller name, and the controller name is also employees. So that completes that attribute for the URL, and we need to give it a type, and this is going to be the HTTP request type. So we have a GET action. So we're going to say the transport, when we need to read data, goes to the action of employees underscore read on the employees controller using a GET request. Now we need to explain to the tree view how to represent the data it gets back. So for that we need a schema. So I'm going to set up a schema. And inside of this schema, we'll have a hierarchical model. And in the hierarchical model, we have an ID. and the employee ID is what is coming back from that projection. And then we also need to tell it, if it has children, where to find that field that defines whether the record has children or not. So we'll say has children is the name of that field where it finds that true or false value if that record has children or not. So now that we've set that up, we should be able to see our tree view in the UI. So now we've added a tree view, we've given it a name, we have our data text field. It's going to pull the full name field from our data. It's going to get that data from the employee's read action on the employee's controller using a GET request. And then it's going to look at the employee ID as the ID on the model and has children to notify the UI whether that record has children or not. So let's go back to our application and give it a refresh. And I may have forgot to save my changes. Did. So let's save our changes and go back to the UI and give it a refresh. And now we should have a nice drill down tree view of hierarchical names. And here we have our first root user or employee. So Andrew is the top tier that everybody reports up to. And then we have Steve here that has some employees that report to him. So you can see we have this nice drill down interface, and it's getting that data from this model here of employee ID, has children, and it's binding that text to the data text field. So now we've updated our team members section of this UI here. So our form is complete. In the next video, we'll talk about partial tag helpers, and this will allow us to get some of our markup out into an external file and make things a little bit more readable and improve our development experience.